Let's discuss sponsorship and sports, shall we? And I kind of want to cover, I suppose, 3 sections today. I want to talk about the positive influence of sponsorship, and I want that to be on the performer. So we're going to have a look at, why is sponsorship good for, let's say, an elite athlete? We're then going to have a look at the positive influence again, and this time we're going to actually have a look at the positive influence on a sponsor. Why would a company pay money to have its brand associated with a sports person, event, stadium, whatever it happens to be? And finally, we're going to have a look at the negative impact of sponsorship. So what is it about sponsorship in general which is questionable, and what are the occasions or circumstances where sponsorship can be seen as a negative influence overall on the sporting experience? Now, first things first, let's do this positive on the performer. So the positive influences of sponsorship, of course, on a performer. So that's what I want to address first of all. Let's see if we can sort of get deep into that. Well, the first thing I want to raise for you, and I guess it's the most obvious one, is that the performer, if they're sponsored, that is, they have money to train. They have money to train, and we could even say / train professionally. And what I mean by this is they can then dedicate their life as a full-time professional athlete to being exactly that. That means their performance quality increases. That means their tendency to win medals, say, increases. That means their tendency to perform at high levels increases. That means sports more spectacular. It might mean that they themselves make more money as a cycle going through that process, but they become wealthier to that end. The next point I want to say is they receive free clothing and equipment. What's not to like about that? Imagine that you were, well, I'm sure you do have your favourite shops, and all of a sudden that favourite shop said, look, you can have anything you want for free. You'd be in there, wouldn't you? Like, that's, of course, is an appealing factor here. And especially if you're a tennis player and you spend your life around tennis, and all of a sudden you get professional, get really high quality tennis rackets provided to you for free, almost unlimited numbers, and they string them for you and they grip them for you. That, of course, makes quite a big difference to how you might perform. We also get the funding of transport. Think about, I mentioned a tennis player, let's stick with that example. Think about a sponsor maybe paying a British number 3 player to go out and travel to Australia and play in the Australian Open. I actually mentioned the Australian Open because as I record, it's actually taking place. But yeah, that's an interesting example. But again, even if you're at kind of like that youth going into representative level, or you're trying to break through into more sort of elite ranks, a little bit of funding around transport can really help. Parents taking you all kinds of places might be a factor some of you are facing right now, for example. It can fund education. So sponsorship can fund education for athletes. So, that could be anything that's formal, maybe an athlete wanting to study a degree so that they can do some kind of role after they finish performing. Or it could be sort of a more general kind of, it could be something much more general that it effectively provides funding and money in order for someone to be able to use their time or invest in their future. We can also say it pays for, or it can pay for medical support. Medical support can be really, really expensive. So if a full-time professional athlete who's training maybe twice a day or 8 times a week, they may well be likely to sort of suffer injury, and therefore that medical support could be very, very valuable to them. It can also encourage, or let's call it motivate the performer. And this, it kind of goes hand in hand with like the pressure point we're going to come to in a second. But if I say the athlete here, the athlete has that kind of increased drive to go on and to achieve even better, maybe to make better sponsorship or whatever other reason it might be. And then finally, guys, it gives status and recognition. Okay, the athlete becomes visible because they're part of, let's say, an advertising campaign. Lots of examples I can think of for that one. But status and recognition for the athlete, that of course increases their earning power. Managed to make these two the same colour. Now, let's go further and let's go, okay, well, what about for the sponsor themselves? So we're looking for the positive influence for the sponsor. Positive on the sponsor. Why is the sponsor ultimately doing this? And I would encourage you to think about what is the fundamental principle here. Well, they want to achieve up arrow increased publicity. Why? Why do they want their product, their service more public? Well, it's a very, very simple answer. They effectively want to increase sales. Okay, so sales, you can obviously use the word profit here, would be a perfectly legitimate one, but also consider that they get things like product placement. You know, I happened to be at a Southampton versus Man City men's football match this weekend, and I saw numerous, I won't mention the companies, I saw numerous adverts and them being placed there on the billboards alongside the performances, alongside these great footballers. And that product placement, of course, is valuable. We also get the idea that, as I just mentioned it really, the product, it could be a service, but let's say the product is linked to success. So if you advertise a sports individual, a sports team, a stadium, whatever, that then experiences success, that success is linked to your business. That obviously potentially means you might sell more. A couple of other points that are really good ones. Sponsors receive tax concessions. So sponsorship gets tax relief. Okay, so tax concessions, it's actually relatively cheap to sponsor something. And then finally, I mean, I'm sure this isn't why they do it, but I guess it is a perk. Employees get free tickets. So it could be that, you know, effectively the sponsor uses the sporting event as entertainment or whatever it is for their clients. Now, there are some negatives of sponsorship, so I'll put these in kind of a red here. Negatives of sponsorship. So why wouldn't we want some kind of sponsorship to take place? What could be the downside? Surely that this is a good thing. So what are the overall negative effects? Well, the first one is it can be withdrawn. You know, someone like a sports person can be sort of relying on that money, and that money is not guaranteed, especially if their performances suffer or they do something a bit dodgy or deviant. Secondly, we also get controlling. The sponsor can try to control the athlete, whether that's the time they need them to making adverts, or whether that's the fact that they won't allow them to do anything else. That's a big factor. I know it's a long time ago, but one of the examples I think of, and it was really well highlighted at the time, was Michael Jordan. I think it was in the 1992 Olympics. I know it's a long time ago, guys, and you weren't born then, but unbelievably famous sports person, and he was big with the Nike brand, as you probably know, sort of Air Jordan. And the US Olympic team was, their kits were provided by Reebok, and he covered it up. He wouldn't wear it. They are controlling in that sense. They can also, along the same notion, they can pressure performers. Performers can sort of have to jump through hoops to receive that money. Of course, the sponsors don't do anything for free, as you can probably imagine. The sponsorship can be immoral. You know, think about some examples like this. Now, I can't use smoking. Most it's legal to advertise smoking in the UK these days, but what about alcohol? There's lots of alcohol sponsors. What about gambling or betting companies? Extremely common in sport. These might be immoral forms of advertising, is something that might want to be sort of considered going forward. A couple of other things that I would mention as well. They may control what they wear. Athlete can only, and I've mentioned this one already, can only wear the sponsor. You know, so it's an example of control, of course. Furthermore, we also get the notion that only elite sports get sponsorship. So only the elite sports that get that sponsorship, which of course leads to further sort of, it distinguishes sort of the haves and the have-nots even further. And we also might get an influence from the sponsor on things like kickoff times. You know, if you're selling car tires and you want the maximum audience to see your brand over a Premiership football match, for example, you might want that kickoff time to be available both in Europe and Asia and all such. So the kickoff time might be changed. Kickoff times changed to suit the sponsor. So there's some factors that we'd encourage you to consider. Positives for the sponsor, positives for the performer, but also the negatives overall of sponsorship. Thanks.